Alright, so 2023 is wrapped up, and this year had a lot of gaming bangers, but it also had an odd amount of duds. And this is my completely biased take on this year of games all wrapped up. And just for transparency, I don't get to play every game that comes out, that'd be impossible. So there's definitely some stuff I missed. And I've also added chapters and categories if you want to just jump around. My top 1 and 2 are pretty locked in, but the other ones can kind of vary depending on my mood at the time. But let's just get right into number 5. Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. While this game didn't blow me away like Breath of the Wild... What the fuck? Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. While this game did make my top 5, it didn't blow me away quite as much as Breath of the Wild did. We have weapon degradation back. The whole thing with the depths just really wasn't that fun to me overall. And most of the exploration in the game just didn't really feel all that rewarding. That said, the game does have some mechanics that make it something truly special. With the item combinations and vehicle building, which is something other devs were completely perplexed over, finding a random stack of materials and just figuring out how to mash them together and make walled machines and weapons to build and solve puzzles is a really big highlight for this game that made it stand out to me. I did enjoy the story overall, but I just don't like how it's pieced together. It's fun solving mysteries of the past through like segmented riddles and whatnot, but when you accidentally get a piece of the story a few chapters ahead that kind of spoils things, just seeing it play out in a non-sequential order, that is a little off-putting at times and can be kind of annoying. Now they did actually bring themed dungeons back in this game, which is a big bonus and something I was hoping for, but overall the music still felt kind of weak outside of a few tracks and not something that I would expect to see in a Zelda game. And it seems like we're not going to get a Zelda of this style anymore in the future, so I'll be curious to see what the future of this franchise holds going forward. Now, as mentioned, I can't play every single game, and there's a game I'm actually kind of glad I skipped. Now, obviously there's the given choices like Kong Skull Island and Lord of the Rings Golem and the whole thing that went around with the day before. Because of that, I'm not going to include those obvious garbage games, and I actually want this to be a game that I kind of felt like I wanted to play and was excited for. And the game that made me feel this way is Starfield. Leading up to this game, I was genuinely excited to play it and see more about it, and more as the marketing came out, it just started to look more and more bland to me, and the hype started slowly just fading away over time. And it just so happened I had a work trip scheduled the week it came out, so I figured I'll sit back, see if it lives up to the hype, and then make a decision from there. And the overall vibe I got from everything about this game was just mid. It seems to hold a special place to some people for the immersion that it can give you, but from my perspective it just looks kind of boring, and I'm glad I missed it. At this point I have real no interest in going back and checking it out at all, and I just hope Bethesda does eventually get their act together in the future. The last couple games they've had have been kind of bland and boring, so I'm hoping they can just live up to their potential, especially now they got that Microsoft money. Now my number 4 might be a little controversial because it just didn't live up to the hope that some people had for it, but that game is Final Fantasy 16. I personally love the combat in this game. I love switching through the icons and using the abilities and swapping them out and trying to figure out what fun new combos I could figure out. And yeah, the story did dip a little bit with Odin, but I think overall I just really enjoyed the story. I thought it was good, well grounded, and I liked the setting. And I actually enjoyed the whole premise with Ultima being this weird creator god thing. Felt like old school Final Fantasy of you fighting a big god at the end to me. For me, the highs of this game just really outdid all the low points. Could the game use better side questing? Yes. Could there be more interesting customization for your character and quest rewards? Yeah, but the combat, the music, and the story overall just really did it for me. All of the icon fights up to Bahamut were super visually and auditory spectacles and something that's really to be remembered, and they're going to stick with me for a little bit. This game did have the MMO feel to it, and that makes sense considering it was made by Creative Business Unit 3, and that team usually does work on MMOs like Final Fantasy 11 and 14, so it makes sense it has that feel, and I think maybe that little bit of feel is something that kind of pushed people towards the negative side. It's also why people are probably a little disappointed in the DLC out right now, as it feels more like they just added a Final Fantasy 14 dungeon to 16, and I don't think that's the direction people necessarily want in this game. I just really enjoyed this fantasy world they built. I like the high fantasy feel to it that 16 had, as well as having more grounded characters. I feel like it was just a really good combination of high fantasy and grounded realism that just worked really well and made things like Game of Thrones really good or Lord of the Rings stand out. I think the big thing is the beginning of 16 really stood out and was special, and it's kind of strange because in Final Fantasy 15 I felt the opposite way. I felt the ending is kind of what stood out and made that game special. So who knows, maybe with Final Fantasy 17 they'll figure out the Krabby Patty formula just right and get the ending and beginning together into one big cohesive masterpiece, but but Final Fantasy 17 is going to be way down the pipeline, and I'm actually kind of hoping it's more like what my number 1 is this year. So while Final Fantasy 16 may have been some people's biggest disappointment, I had a different game that was my biggest disappointment, and that game was Mortal Kombat 1. This is the game I think I had overall overhyped for myself a little bit, and I was just super let down by. The whole assist combat for me just wasn't an enjoyable evolution on the Mortal Kombat gameplay, and I really just don't like how the story progressed into this goofy Mortal Kombat multiverse with all these different versions of Titans and all kinds of wacky stuff. And the Invasion mode was just kind of a big letdown and really felt like it was lacking some substance and impact. And the way this game is handling all its microtransactions, charging you for seasonal fatalities and a bunch of other stuff is just really off-putting to me. Sure, it looks pretty and can be fun to watch a tournament set every now and then, but I felt like once I finished the story and had seen all the fatalities, my desire to play this game was pretty much just gone. And I felt like it just lacked some of that charisma that previous Mortal Kombat games had, which is ultimately why it was a big disappointment for me. I feel like ever since Resident Evil 7 came out, Capcom has just been knocking it out of the park with Resident Evil games. Resident Evil 3 was a little weak, and we can just ignore some of the multiplayer attempts, but RE4 Remake does a perfect job of bringing that action-horror combo together, along with that goofy, goober creepiness that Resident Evil has overall. I'd never really played the original RE4 all together at once. I always kind of played it in pieces at friends' houses growing up, so this is kind of a new experience for me, even though it was a remake. And honestly, I feel like this game kind of gets lost in the shuffle a little bit with all the stuff that came out this year, especially since it came out earlier on in the year. But I really enjoyed my time with this game, and mutilating zombies with a swag only Leon can muster, and the gunplay and the cinematic bosses just really make this game. Did Ada's voice actor suck? Yeah. Do you kind of fight the same repetitive enemies over and over again? Yeah, sort of. Also, could a walnut solve most of the puzzles in this game? Yeah, probably. They weren't that difficult at all. But going through the game and getting more and more crazy enemies, and first time you fight a regenerator and you don't really know what it is, it's just something kind of memorable and sticks with you. And most of the grievances that I actually have with this game really aren't that major, which is why I put it so high up on my list. I wouldn't say this game was a mind-blowing spectacle masterpiece, but this game was just really good and really solid all the way around, and I couldn't find too much terribly wrong with it. So while I'm glad I missed the Starfield bus, there are a couple games that I missed that I just really wanted to play and just haven't had the time to go back and play. And I honestly couldn't decide on just one, so I picked two. And those two games that are Lies of P and Alan Wake 2. I remember seeing all the trailers for Lies of P coming out, and I got really interested because it had this Bloodborne-esque style and a strange Pinocchio theme, and it just really seemed interesting. And then when I started seeing the word of mouth once it came out about how the weapon systems are really good, and there was tons of interesting enemies, and just watching other people play it, the game seemed really good, and I'm kind of upset that I missed that initial hype train and wasn't able to jump aboard. As for Alan Wake 2, I really enjoyed the first game, and it always had more of a cult following to it, and I sort of thought the same thing was going to happen with this one. It'd come out, it would be good, but it wouldn't have a huge fervor like it did, and apparently this game just popped off. I've actually tried to avoid a lot of information on Alan Wake 2, just in case I do decide to backlog it one day and go back, but from my understanding, the story and the music just really make this game, and it's a really trippy and amazing experience. I really just wish that I had the time to play them when they released and get caught up in the hype. But if you think Lies of P or Alan Wake 2 are actually like some of the best games ever and you think I should do it, just let me know in the comments below, and maybe I'll break it out next year if there's a gap between games. Now, number 2 is a little bit different because I actually had time to play this game. I just didn't have time to make any content around it. But my number 2 choice for this year is Armored Core Fires of Rubicon. This game actually took me by complete surprise and had a really immersive feel to it that I wasn't expecting. I've always felt kind of lukewarm about mech games. They can be enjoyable, but they've never been anything that's amazed me or drawn my attention completely. And I kind of, from the marketing, felt this game was going to be a little bit similar to that, but it ended up just blowing me away. Crazy in-your-face mech combat that this game has was addicting, and the way you can mix and match your different mech pieces to handle the missions or bosses that you're having troubles with just makes the mech really feel like something of your own and something you're creating, and it makes that mech feel like a very special individual character. Sure, people found out about the double Zimmerman cheese, and I'm sure this new ranked PvP they just added, hyper metas are going to emerge and only a handful of weapons are going to be useful, but playing through the story overall, it was just amazing. I also found it clever how you never actually saw any characters in this game, you only saw their mechs, and it really helped give the world this harsh, cold, inhuman feel to it. And this was actually a very character-driven narrative, which is strange because you all only see them as mechs, but the characters are really what makes the game's story immersive and great. They each have incredibly unique personalities, they're all very well voice acted, and they all have crazy awesome mechs that you get to fight against, which makes it even better. That also spawned a lot of fan art, which was equally amusing. I think the overall style and feel of this game just really clicked with me when I wasn't expecting it, and that's what kind of made it shoot up and grab my attention and really want me to put it in the top 5, and the more and more I was thinking about this game, the more and more I just wanted to put it higher and higher on my list. So figuring out the game I've played most this year is kind of tricky because I have a very bad habit of leaving a game just turned on my computer and it ranks up the hours. And so apparently Darkest Dungeon 2 by the numbers was the game I played the most this year, but I know I've left it on for way longer, and I think I even took a work trip once and left it on, so I just know it's not correct and that's not my most played game. At this point, I think World of Warcraft might be coming up there in my most played game. The adventures I've been having in the hardcore and doing some of the season discovery stuff have just been pretty fun, and it's been kind of my new addiction lately. That said, Street Fighter 6 barely just inked out my number 1 by a few hours to become my most played. Unlike Mortal Kombat 1, I really enjoyed Street Fighter 6. I thought it had a lot to offer. And am I a boring old man who plays Ryu? Yes. Am I terrible? Yes. But do I really enjoy just firing it up and playing a couple sets for an hour or two every now and then? Absolutely. And that's why it probably ended up being my most played game of the year, and at least deserves an honorable mention. This next game, however, is something I absolutely hated playing. So if you stuck around this channel for any amount of time, you've noticed a good amount of Final Fantasy VII content, and I really enjoy Final Fantasy VII Remake. I like how the story's unfolding, and it's just been fun sharing a lot of theories and ideas about what could be happening to the story. That said, the game that helps generate a lot of these theories is also terrible in my opinion. Final Fantasy Ever Crisis is the worst game I've played this year. It's just a gacha mobile game that I'm surprised they even made a PC port of, that just tries to squeeze you out of money for weapons and skins and upgrades and uses nostalgia as bait. There's like a million different currencies and you really have no clue what buys what. So I used to force myself to play this game when I worked out, which usually you wouldn't play a game when you're working out because usually it takes some focus, but the combat in this game is just so bland and dull that you can essentially just make it do auto everything and it'll play itself and you don't have to worry about anything. So essentially you're just kind of watching like a casino slot just keep rolling along as your characters keep attacking, and then you see your little coin payout at the end, and it was just awful. The strange thing to me though is it seems like there's a lot of effort into the designs and everything that went into this game, which has me feeling like some of the weapon designs might show up in Rebirth as actual weapons at some point. It also gives this whole unique story plot line with the first soldier, which is decent, but I would say just read a wiki on it. It's not worth playing and slogging through this game to get through. So my number 1 game of this year is the basic answer that a lot of people have given. It's essentially the pumpkin spice of favorite games this year, and that game is Baldur's Gate 3. Quite frankly, this game just blew everyone away, and while being from an indie studio, albeit a pretty AAA one, it really just knocked the visuals and storytelling and the pure character freedom that just isn't found much of these days just out of the park. And more uniquely, all of this was done in a style of game that's been considered pretty much dead for years now. While this is my number 1, do I think it's perfect? No, I actually think the game's kind of a little overhyped, to be honest, even though it is my number 1. I know, it's weird me saying that. I do feel like the combat and feel of this game can take a little bit of time to kind of wrap your head around, and a lot of players are just going to die because they're just confused by what's going on, which is never a good feeling to have when you're playing a game. And I definitely felt like the game started slowing down a little bit towards the final chapter, and while they've been doing a lot of updates to this game, I definitely hit a lot of game-breaking bugs that caused me to have to just reset a couple times. That said, the main reason I wanted to put this as my number 1 is just how vast and different all the events can just play out in this game and always make you wonder what's going to happen next or what's going to happen if I do X instead of that. And all this is done in an old style game which was considered dead that they've updated for modern audiences and turned it into something really special that promised bear sex in the advertisements. I really feel like this game got lucky and just really captured lightning in a bottle, and it just worked out perfectly. But the thing is, it wasn't just luck, it was actually carefully crafted, and carefully made, which is what made it so good. And I feel like a lot of studios are going to look at this game now, and sort of like what Hades did a couple years back, is a lot of other studios are going to start trying to emulate this style of game, which is going to be difficult because unlike where Hades, where you could make a quick copy of everything, this is going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort to do. But I really feel like some franchises, like Final Fantasy, could actually do a really good job of trying to emulate this style and making it something their own, as this style now appears to be alive, resurrected, and people really connect with it. I honestly just hope that Larian just keeps adding more and more onto this game. I know they said they don't plan on making a DLC or an expansion or anything like that, but I feel like there's no way you can have this big of a commercial success and not keep adding to it. It'd be nice just to see a couple extra chapters, or maybe even do a whole separate story where you don't have to do the whole Mind Flayer thing. I think that would be really nice, as that was kind of one of my bigger gripes in the story, is you were sort of forced into doing it even if you didn't want to do it. In my playthrough, I actually tried to avoid using any of the worms and doing anything, and then eventually I found out it didn't matter. You're going to have to do this whole Mind Flayer stuff anyway, so that was a little disappointing, but you get so much freedom otherwise, I can't really complain. But yeah, ultimately Baldur's Gate 3 was my #1 game of 2023, and honestly, if you asked me in 2022, I wouldn't have even seen that coming, which is why it's exciting to look forward into 2024 and see what's on the horizon. And looking at 2024 right now, we're only teased with a handful of games right now, but there's definitely some good ones coming out. Obviously, I'm excited for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, that's why I've been making some content around it, but I am a little worried about how the open world's going to play and feel. I'm also kind of concerned that I might be overhyping it a little bit to myself too much. I do have some concerns about how the story might go, but you won't know until you actually play through it, so there's just no point in getting worried about it yet anyways. Before February even rolls around, we've already got 2 big games coming out in January that I'm excited for. Those are both Tekken 8 and Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. Fortunately, they both come out on the exact same day, so I'm actually probably going to skip Tekken 8. Tekken 8 looks really good visually and was actually getting me excited to kind of jump back into the Tekken franchise, as I've always kind of observed it but never actually played it recently, but it looks like once again I'm going to be observing it and not actually playing it myself. Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth though has me super excited, as these Yakuza games usually have a lot going on and have a lot to offer. Sometimes the story can be a little melodramatic, but it's kind of balanced out by the amount of zany side quests and just general goofiness that goes on in these games, and that's what really gives the game its charm. Yakuza Like a Dragon is probably one of my actual favorite RPGs. Like, I really enjoyed that game. So this is the sequel to that, so of course I'm super excited for it. I want to see what's going on with it. They do a really good job at mixing these heartfelt moments in with some goofy comedic stuff, and that's just what really makes that franchise special to me, and it's something I'm really hoping I can get through and enjoy enough before Rebirth comes out. And once Rebirth does come out, the month after in March, Dragon's Dogma 2 drops. I barely played Dragon's Dogma 1, but the second one is looking super interesting with a lot of the elements and combat and just everything they're showing, and how this world's supposed to be kind of like randomly generated. Like, there was a whole discussion about how some troll completely destroyed a city in one person's build but didn't do that in another, so I'm really curious to see how this plays out and to see if it actually could break the game or make it more fun. That said, I'm just hoping I don't get RPG fatigue, as that's 3 months in a row with 3 big RPGs back to back. Thankfully, they all have very different styles and feels, so I don't think that'll necessarily be an issue. There's also the highly elusive Elden Ring DLC that everyone was expecting to see at the Game Awards, but now it's just kind of this big mystery, and I'm sure we're going to see that at some point next year, probably mid to late year, since they didn't want to announce everything yet, but who knows, maybe they're just going to shadow drop it on us or something. Hades 2 is also said to have early access coming in Q4 next year, and the first Hades was amazing. I think I already referenced it once in this video already, but yeah, a lot of games have tried to emulate the Hades franchise since then, so I can't wait to see what they do to improve upon what they already made. They did say it's going to be an early access end of Q4, so it means we're probably not going to get an official release for that game, unfortunately, until 2025. Another game I'm very curious about is this Black Myth Wukong game that we've been seeing a lot of over the past years. They've been teasing this game by showing some wild looking game footage that almost seems unreal. It really has me curious of whether this is a real game or whether it's just kind of a big farce and they've just been generating a lot of hype around a concept and they're going to patch something barely put together. I feel like this game is going to be something you should be carefully optimistic about. It could be something like Larian did with Baldur's Gate 3 and they could blow everyone away and it could be wild. But I could also see this game ending up being something like Forspoken that gets a bit overhyped and everyone's just talking about the buzz around it, and then it comes out and it just ends up falling a little flat. It's not exactly the package you thought it would be. But for the most part, those are the games that come to top of mind when I think of next year so far. I think we could also maybe see Nintendo talk about or tease their next console handheld, whatever they're going for. But for now, it does seem like most developers are kind of keeping things close to their chest, so I'm also trying to get a loose game playing schedule going on in my head so I know what I'm going to be playing and trying to work on every single month. So if there is a game that's coming out and you definitely want me to look into it, just let me know below. And also, I feel like my top 5, while I did enjoy all these games, I do feel like it was a little safe. I think Baldur's Core and Baldur's Core. I think Armored Core and Baldur's Gate were probably the most special out of anything that came out this year. I don't think they break my favorite games of all times list, but yeah, let me know what your top 5 is. As always, drive fast, take chances, and see you next year, nerds.